Hey guys, Mike with Chassis Parts Online. Today we are going to discuss the narrow crossmember that I sell. Okay, this is the 4 3/4 inch narrower than stock, narrower than Crown Vic crossmember. As I said, it's 4 3/4 inches narrower than a stock aluminum Crown Vic crossmember, and that's basically at the mounting points for the control arms. 4 3/4 narrower. And now you may ask why is it 4 3/4 narrower? Why is it in 5 or 5.5 or 6 or whatever? Okay, and that's because of the rack. The rack has to match the width of the crossmember. Okay, so on the rack you got a mount here, and right past that mount you got a pivot point on each side. You got where there's a knuckle there, and the tie rod goes out to your. The inner tie rod goes out to your outer tie rod, okay? Well, imagine your upper control arm, the bushing for it is at right about here. And there's your lower bushing. There's a line from the top bushing to the lower bushing, and that knuckle for that rack, the inner pivot point, has to be in that line, okay? If it's not, it has to be on that line on both sides. If it's not, what you're going to get is bump steer. And for those that don't know what that is, that means the toe changes as the suspension cycles up and down. Okay. The other thing is that tie rod going out has to be parallel with the lower control arm. In other words, where the tie rod comes out here, the distance from that knuckle down to that bushing is the same from where the outer tie rod is down to the pivot and the ball joint. Okay. If that's not correct, it'll change going up and down too. Okay. So you can't just throw any rack on a narrow crossmember, and you can't just narrow a crossmember to whatever you feel like narrowing it to. It just doesn't work that way. You got to have a matching rack, okay? So this uses a Lincoln Mark 8 rack. It's also a Thunderbird rack, 1996 Lincoln Mark 8, 1996 Ford Thunderbird. That's the target year. There's some other years that fit, and it's a pretty common rack. But that's the one I tell everybody to look for. You can find them on Rock Auto and new and rebuilt. You can find them on just about any auto parts store, and other manufacturers make them. Okay, so basically the rack mounts right here in the front. Got a 5/8 bolt. The rack has a bushing with a center metal sleeve in it, and we send you a washer, bolt, and nut for this for both sides. We didn't used to do that, but I do now. Rack mounts there. The steering comes right up through here, okay? Rack pivot points there. Okay, now on the outer tie rods on this rack, I guess they're called the inner tie rods, the threads on those are M14 1.5 right-hand threads, just like the Crown Vic tie rod ends, okay? So you can use your Crown Vic tie rod ends on that rack. Now you're gonna have to cut some off depending on whether you're running short control arms or not. You're gonna have to cut 2 3/8 inches off of the rack, and that'll be off of either end. Or you can cut 1 3/8 off the rack and 1 inch off the tie rod ends. Okay, so this is the one that fits the 65 to 79 chassis that has those same 6 holes right there. Now those holes are on the frame of the Ford truck chassis, and I'll show you those. Let me go outside and show you those real quick, then we'll get back to this. Okay, those 6 holes right there. Same thing on the other side right there. All right, these 6 holes are where the coil spring upper pocket mount was, and these were riveted on. I think the original rivets were about 7/16, and that coil pocket stuck way up here where the coil spring was. So basically, when you cut all those rivets out, that's your mounting point for that piece, the center section. However, since the frame is C-shaped, you can't just stick it up in there because there's no way to get it in there. So what we have is a frame box that sits inside here, and it makes it the width 29 inches going across there. So that's how that bolts. And the frame box has 6 holes, just the same as this. Okay, so, and the other thing is, this is your axle center line. Right down the middle of here is the axle center line. There's 2 holes on the bottom too, see? Those 2 holes down there where that was, that's where your bump stop was. That's the center line. Right down the middle of this is the center line. So you guys that want to move yours forward with the narrow crossmember, you would have to re-drill your new holes. You'd have to re-drill these holes too, which is probably a pain in the ass, but I need to come up with a mount that moves everything forward without having to drill a bunch of holes, and I can do that. But let's get back inside. Okay, so yeah, there's your 6 holes. Now on the 48 to 52, 53 to 56, 57 to 60, and 61 to 64 trucks, this has a different plate. These holes are further down here. There's a hole in the center, which just basically tells me which plate I'm using easily. This also has a notch at the bottom and top. That's your axle center line. Makes everything easy if you need to move it forward or backward. I don't know why anybody would move backward, but if you move it forward, you can use that line right there as the easy mark to know where you're at. Okay, so this is all this plate right here. This is all quarter. These uprights, these are called the risers. These are all quarter. The center section is 2x4 rectangle tube. It's not quarter, it's 3/16. There's a washer welded on here, and this washer is 3/16 thick. It's actually stainless. Okay, so when your bolt or your lock washer, if you use a lock washer or whatever you use. Now I send a bolt with a lock nut, but if you put something on here, it's not going to scratch up and start rusting when it gets through the paint or powder coat, whatever you got on there, because it's stainless. So that's what I do on everything. I mean, stainless obviously costs a lot more, but I'd rather have somebody's piece not rust. Okay. So as I said, that's the rack mounts. You see they're kind of offset to one side. That's because the mounts on the rack themselves are offset to one side, just like the motor mounts are offset to the right side. Okay. Now these motor mounts, these are the same distance apart, side to side, as the factory Crown Vic, and they're also from the ground to the top of these are the same height as the factory Crown Vic. The only difference in these is they have a half 13 threaded bung welded on the inside, so you don't have to stick something up through the bottom. Okay. Now these are basically the same size as the Crown Vic. One side of the Crown Vic is wider and has a slotted hole here, but these are basically the same, the 16 inches apart, which is the center to center, same as the other. Okay. Let me turn this thing around. So if you got a clever eye, you can see how this mounts. So when I'm cutting this tube right here, when I cut this piece out right here, I made it to where it comes down over the side and welds to here and has some structure out this way. That makes these mounts really strong. I just had to kind of move this inside this other mount, move it forward enough to get that right there. But I wanted that to be strong that way. Now it's a lot more of a pain in the ass to cut that notch out right there to make that stronger like that. But the benefit of that is that piece that I cut off there, that's it right there. Okay, so I just have to clean them up, drill the holes, and that's that piece, instead of having one cut and bent or laser cut or whatever. But it's still a pain in the ass to cut that out. But look how much structure you got right there. All that is welded to that there and there, and plus it's welded under this plate and under this other plate. These are welded to this tube first before these fillers are put on. These fillers are only 3/16 thick, but they're welded outside, and then I also weld them on the inside. Kind of hard to see there, but I weld those with a MIG welder on the inside. It's kind of hard to get down in there to do that, to see that, all that. But I try to weld all that up. If you get one of these in the mail, try to spray some primer or maybe put some caulk or something down in there, just to make sure that no water gets inside any of those welds from the backside. That's bad because they'll start rusting on the inside. I try to get as much primer in these holes as I can. Obviously this one probably needs a little bit more primer, but I don't want it to get to you and be rusty, but because sometimes these pieces sit around my shop a while. Okay, so this is 29 wide. Okay. And I said it fits that frame. Now we also make this in what you would call a stub end version. Okay, it's a little bit wider than this. The key thing that you need is the outside of the frame rail needs to be 34 wide. Okay, and on the Ford truck, it's 2 1/4. Some of them are 2 1/2. So that's why this is 29 with the frame boxes in it. But if, let's say you're using 2x4 rectangle tube to make your frame, if you're 34 wide on the outside, that means you're 30 on the inside. That means this is an inch too narrow. Okay, now we make a stub in version where these come out another 1/2 inch on each side, but everything else is the same. The holes, it either comes with this plate or the holes, or the plate with the holes that are dropped. And basically you have, these holes would line up with your square tube, okay, because the top of the tube needs to be 1 1/4 inches above the center of this hole right here, okay? That makes the upper control arm sit in the right spot. The upper control arm mount has the same holes as those. You can drill through your tube and do whatever. I prefer to, like if I have to do it on a stub end, the top 2 holes, I just drill through. The middle 2 holes, I'll drill through and take a 3/4 bit, run through, and I'll put 2 crush sleeves in there. And then on the bottom, I'll just put a tab coming off the tube over here, or I'll box it in and drill the holes through that. You can do it however you want to, but it worked great with the stub in version. You can order this without those holes. You can order this with a square plate or any shape plate you want, but just remember the distance has to be the same. Okay, so this is the center section. I'll show you the next piece, which will be the frame boxes. We're about to start building a batch of those, and I'll get those cleaned up and primered. I'm gonna paint one of these, and I'm gonna use it for pictures on the website. I'm gonna use it to put on my stock frame outside that I'm gonna take to shows, just to show the pieces off. If I make any more of these in paint, just for the website, if I have any extra ones, I will sell those at a discounted price. Just let me know if you want one of those. So I'll go through all the different pieces that go on this kit, and then once I do that, I'll make a video installing all these pieces one by one. We do have some prototyping videos up on YouTube. One of them is the 53 to 56 that we made a prototype. The center section is the same as this, except it uses that taller plates on the end. Uses a different frame box and different rear arm mounts. The upper mount's the same as a 65 to 79. And then I did an 80 to 96 frame. I prototyped it, and almost all the whole process is videoed on YouTube. The guy had to come pick up the frame before I completely finished everything on YouTube, but he's got it done. Anyways, I'll do some videos of the total install, so you can see how easy it is to install one of these. This thing is 100% bolt in to existing holes in the frame. There's only a couple of places where you have to drill a hole. All these holes are over there, as we all talked about. The holes on the rear arm mount on the side of the frame, those are already there. You just got to ream them out bigger. On the top of the frame, though, there's a couple of holes that you have to drill. There's 2 inside holes that line up. The 2 outside holes do not. You'll have to drill those. But that's pretty damn easy considering what you're getting here. 100% bolt in. You don't need to do any welding. And then, as I said, it fits right in. As I said, these mounts are the same as factory Crown Vic. The other thing is, anybody that makes an aftermarket mount for these motor mounts will fit right on here. We recommend the ones that Kyle Outcast makes. They will fit right on here, okay? So, if you got any questions about that, hit me up, and we'll go from there. Thanks, peace.